Hi everyone, happy Tuesday. I'm Mrs. Foster. We miss you all so much and hope you're staying healthy and doing well. We are on day 2 of our second packet today. I'm going to guide you through the process of how you can do this at your house. So the first thing that I'm going to do is talk about what your packet looks like. So your packet for packet 2, day 2, starts with reading, and it says, the invention of processed foods, food that is not fresh and packaged in order to last longer, has made eating so much easier for all of us. But is it the best thing for us to eat? You decide. And they want you to read pros and cons of processed food. So this is what yours looks like. I have it on my screen as well. It's pros and cons of processed food. The first thing that I would suggest doing is numbering your paragraphs. So when I go to mine, obviously the title is called Pros and Cons of Processed Food. I'm gonna start by numbering each one of my paragraphs. So this is paragraph 1. Remember, every time it indents, it starts a new paragraph. Paragraph 2, and you can go ahead and do this on your own. Paragraph 3. Paragraph 3, as you can see, extends up to the top. So where it starts with today, this will be paragraph 4. And then when I flip it over, paragraph 4 is extended, so we have paragraph 5, paragraph 6, paragraph 7, 8, and 9. So we have 9 total paragraphs, and yours should look similar to mine. So after I number the paragraphs, I'm going to go ahead and box in my title. It's called Pros and Cons of Processed Food. These are strategies that I'm sure you're used to doing in your classroom, and I'm just reminding you of what those are now. And I'm going to go ahead and read this with you as you follow along at your house. So it says, paragraph 1, go into any grocery store and you will see shelves lined with processed foods. Processed foods are popular in many households. However, some people say that they are not worth the convenience they provide. Processed foods are foods that have been changed in some way by people. They include frozen dinners, cereal, lunch meat, crackers, and granola bars. Canned and frozen foods and vegetables are also processed food. Unprocessed, remember un means not, unprocessed foods include things such as raw fruits, vegetables, and nuts. These foods are eaten in their natural state. Paragraph 3. One of the first processed foods was the frozen TV dinner. In the 1950s, many American families welcomed this new invention into their homes. One company had developed a process of quick freezing foods. During this process, foods are frozen very quickly and ice crystals form around them. Before this time, the technology to quick freeze foods was not available. In the 1950s, many families enjoyed watching television while they ate dinner. Frozen TV dinners provided a quick and inexpensive, not expensive way to prepare dinner. Today, more and more people are on the go. Between work, school, sports, and other activities, many families don't have the time or energy to devote to home-cooked meals. Processed foods provide an appealing alternative. More and more of the foods we eat come out of a can, a bottle, a box, or some other kind of package. Before I move on, I'm going to look at this fact box up here that says, did you know? Because sometimes the information included in the fact boxes are information we need to answer our comprehension questions. So it says, did you know a large part of what most Americans eat is ready-to-go food? A study showed that Americans eat 31% more packaged food than fresh food. Okay, paragraph 5. Processed foods can taste good. However, sometimes they contain ingredients that are not necessarily good for us. Sugar, salt, and fat are key ingredients in many processed foods. Often these foods contain a lot of calories as well. People with food allergies have to be careful with processed foods. Often nuts are processed using the same equipment as other foods, so people with nut allergies have to read labels. And down here, they give you an example of what it would be like to read a label where it tells you the total fat, cholesterol, sodium, total carbohydrates, etc. Hundreds of years ago, people ate food straight from the land. They hunted animals, they gathered or grew their own plants. There were few things in their food that were harmful. Today, most people do not have the time to grow and harvest their own food. For most people, it is easier and cheaper to buy food at a grocery store. Paragraph 7, processed foods are designed to stay on the shelf for a long time. Preservatives, such as salt, are added to foods to make them last. Some people argue that preservatives are not healthy for our bodies. Some processed foods can be good for you. Milk is a processed food that many people drink. Fruit or vegetable juice can also be somewhat healthy unless it has added sugar. Orange juice has added calcium. This makes it even more nutritious. Frozen vegetables retain their vitamins and minerals. People can enjoy eating them all year round. Processed foods provide a convenient, low-cost option for many busy families. Not all processed foods are unhealthy. Carefully read food labels. This will help you identify foods that have high amounts of sugar, salt, or fat, and that's what we just talked about. Here's the nutrition facts. You can usually find these on the side or the back of any type of food that you're eating if it is processed food as well. Okay, so your assignment, I'm gonna go back to the front. Let's go back to our smartboard. So we've read what we needed to read, and remember our assignment said to make a T-chart of the pros and cons of processed foods like the one below using details from the passage. So this is the T-chart that you were given in your packet instructions. On the left side, it has pros of processed food. It tells you in parentheses what that means. So pros of processed food, why it can be a good thing. Why can eating processed foods be a good thing? So that's kind of like the positives. And then cons of processed food, we're doing a T-chart. So we're comparing two things, contrasting them, comparing and contrasting. These are opposites. So cons of processed food, why it can be unhealthy. So whereas the pros are looking at why it can be a good thing, the cons are why it is not a good thing, okay? So I just wanted to show you, I set this up as well. Just on a piece of paper, you can do the same thing. And I just, on one side, I have processed food. I'm sorry, let me move the camera. Pros of processed food, why it can be a good thing, and then cons of processed food, why it can be unhealthy. So what I would suggest is go back into your text, look through each paragraph, and you can just simply do bullet points. So you're looking for what's one reason why a processed food could be a good thing. So once you find it, your text evidence, you can go ahead and write the reason here, what is one pro, and you can even put the paragraph that you found it in, okay? So I would underline it in the text, write your answer here with the paragraph that you found it in, just like we do in class. And then cons, same thing, just do a bullet point here, find a reason to start why it can be unhealthy for people to eat processed foods, and then you can just go ahead and list it on your T-chart, okay? Everything you need to know for this is in the text, so you shouldn't have to look any further for that. So that's your independent assignment for reading. Now, going back to our whiteboard. Next up is the writing piece. So connected to what we read, the pros and cons of processed food, you're going to write about your favorite meal. They're asking, what is your favorite meal? Write the directions for one of your favorite family meals. So this is like functional text that we've talked about. So first you have to identify what is your favorite meal, and then following that step-by-step directions for one of your favorite family meals. For example, how do you make it? So if my favorite meal is spaghetti, I would identify that as spaghetti, how to make spaghetti, and you can write directions for how to do that. Okay, so that is kind of like the reading and writing piece of day 2. Now, Yesterday, Miss Eddie went over your math problem of the day, which is on here on the screen for you. So as she mentioned, whoever does the YouTube channel tomorrow, they will go over the problem that I introduced to you today, because the idea is that you're working on this independently and kind of checking it when we go over it. So it says, solve the following problem on paper and explain your thinking with pictures, numbers, and words. So here's our problem again. It says the PTA set a goal of selling 500 pizzas in 3 months. The table below shows how many pizzas they have sold so far. So on the left, you have months. On the right, you have pizzas sold. So in January, they sold 135 pizzas. In February, 257 pizzas, but we're not sure how many they sold in March. So the problem is asking, how many do they need to sell in March to make their goal? So this is the missing piece. How many did they sell in January and February combined? So you're answering two questions here. So I'm going to work through this with you, how we would be solving this in class. As you know, this is a word problem. So the first thing that I'm going to need to identify is, what do we know? What is the problem telling us? What do we know? So let me go to my paper so you can see it. And I'm going to set up my graphic organizer. Okay, so the first thing I want to write is, what do we know? That's the first piece. Okay, so if you're looking at your information, the first thing that we know is that in January, well, they tell us actually something before that. Our goal is to sell 500 pizzas. That's one thing we know. The next thing we know is month by month. So we know in January, I'm going to abbreviate that with a J, we have 135 sold. You can see that I'm shortening things because you don't need to write out these whole paragraphs. You just want to get the main idea of what you need to know. So then in February, we know we have 257 sold. I'm getting this straight from the word problem that you have in front of you. So this is straight from your packet from day 2. Okay. Remember that the selling 500 pizzas, we want to do this in 3 months. So we have 2 of the months, but not the third. Okay. Okay. We have everything that we know. So now we need to figure out, what is it asking? And it's actually, in this problem, asking 2 separate pieces. So one thing that it's asking is, how many do they need to sell in March to make their goal? How many do they need to sell in March to meet goal? Again, doesn't need to be complete sentences. Please understand that I'm getting this, though, directly from what you have. None of this is coming out of my head. It's right in front of me. And the second question is, how many did they sell in January and February combined? So I'm just going to write how many sold in J and F combined. We know if it's combined, we're going to be putting these together, right? Okay, so what do we know? We know that we have to sell 500 pizza as our goal in 3 months. In January, we sold 135. In February, 257. What is the question asking us? The question is asking us, how many do they need to sell in March to meet their goal? Also, how many sold in January and February combined? Okay, so the next thing that we do in our graphic organizer is going to be to draw a picture. So over here, I'm going to just write pick. Now, we don't have the whole, but we have some parts of this. So this picture can look whatever is comfortable for you in terms of solving it. So the way that I see this in my own head is that I have this big goal of selling 500 pizzas, right? That's broken into 3 months. So making up that 500 will be broken into 3 months. Well, I only have January and February, and I'm missing March. So I can see that in January, I have 135, and in February, I have 257. So that's over 100 more. So relatively, I'm just going to draw January, and I'm going to write 135. Underneath, this is for January. Now, I sold a little bit more in February, 257. My missing piece is March. So in all 3 of these months, January, February, and March, I need to get to 500 pizzas. So this is the way that in my head, I'm able to see my missing piece, what I have together, and where I need to get. Okay? So the last piece of this is going to be to solve the problem. So how are we going to solve it? Well, we have enough information here. We have our goal as 500, we have January, and we have February. So let's look at our questions. This is a 2-step problem, multi-step. How many do they need to sell in March to meet their goal? How many sold in January and February combined? Okay, so we already have January and February. So I'm gonna go ahead and look at that question first. So step 1, if you did not do these steps in this order, that is okay. Step 1 of solving, so that's where I am, is going to be to combine January and February. Well, when I'm combining, I'm putting them together, right? So I'm going to be adding them. So I have 135, make sure you line up your digits, plus 257. So what is 7 plus 5? 7 plus 5 is 12. Here your 1. 3 plus 1 is 4, plus 5 is 9. 2 plus 1 is 3. So 392 is J and F combined. So we actually already answered the second question, because our second question was how much are they combined. So over here, I'm going to note something. When I added these two together, my sum was 392. Okay, so really another way that I can see this drawn, if I go back to my whole, $392 in January and February, I'm missing my piece. My goal is 500. So the next step in solving this problem, step 2, my goal is 500. I already have sold 392. So I need to figure out this difference, how I'm going to get from where I am at 392 to 500. So I'm going to subtract these two. Okay, let me circle my sign. Forgot to do that over here. I cannot take 2 from 0, so we need to borrow. All the way over to your hundreds place, the 5 becomes a 4, the 0 becomes a 10. But then I need to borrow again. So the 10 becomes a 9. And this becomes a 10. Okay? So 10 minus 2 is 8. 9 minus 9 is 0. 4 minus 3 is 1. So in March, I will have to sell 108 pizzas to reach my goal of 500. Okay, so, but let me show you something. You can check this as well. This sold in March. Because subtraction is the opposite of addition, if you add what you sold in March, 108, to what you already sold, you should get 500. So going backwards, 108 plus 392 is 500. So I'm going to go ahead and just check my work. So this is my check. So 108, this was in March. If I combine that with what I sold in January and February, 392, this is J, January and February, I should get my total goal. So 8 plus 2 is 10. 9 plus 1 is 10. 500. This was my goal. So am I correct? Yes, I am. Okay. Now, whether you solve this a different way, you started with a different step, that's okay, as long as you understand the main idea of what was going on here. Okay, I think it's best to organize this with what do we know, what is it asking, picture, and then solving it. All right. Okay, so the other part of your math lesson is to choose a game, and Miss Eddie went over the games yesterday, but to choose a math game from either your first packet or from your packet that you have now. Okay, so you can choose any game and they ask you to write the game that you played. For tomorrow, your math problem that you're actually doing today is going to be to solve this problem. So it says solve the problem, the following problem on paper, and explain your thinking with pictures, numbers, and words. Maria, Kara, and Tommy ordered one pizza to share. Maria eats 1/4 of the pizza. Kara eats 1/8 of the pizza, and Tommy eats 3/8 of the pizza. How much of the pizza is left? Now I'm going to give you a hint. Make sure that you're figuring out what your whole is. I can see that Maria is, the total pieces is 4. My whole is 4, but with Kara and Tommy, my whole is 8. So you need to make sure you find a common denominator to figure out what the whole is. Okay, so that is your problem to be reviewed tomorrow. Make sure you're going on Dreambox for 20 minutes and list the game that you played when you were on Dreambox. Remember, if you have difficulty getting to Dreambox, you can just go to the Dutrow homepage, go to Students, and then go to the Clever portal and log in using your lunch number for the username and your lunch number for the password. Okay? All right, the last thing that we are going to talk about is your science. So we're looking at the Chesapeake watershed today. It says, read the Chesapeake watershed. When you're finished reading, you are supposed to be writing a letter to your teacher explaining how a farmer could use pesticides in Maryland and how using them might impact people living in the coastal plain region of Virginia. So we know when we're looking at our 5 bordering states that Maryland is north of Virginia. So when we talk about a watershed, we're talking about everything being downstream. So when you're writing your letter to your teacher, you're going to want to explain, how does a farmer who uses these pesticides, how is that going to impact people that are living in our region of Virginia, even though he's living in Maryland? Okay, so let's look at the Chesapeake watershed first. I know it's a little bit small on here, but on yours, it should be a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is a textbook page and it explains the Chesapeake watershed. So I'm going to read this to you and then you can use that information to complete your assignment. Okay, it says the Chesapeake watershed, it covers parts of 6 states. Over 3,600 species depend on it to survive. Let's pretend your school just held a car wash. What happens to that soapy water? Some of it might seep into the ground, some of it might drip into a storm drain, but then what happens? It will begin to soak down into underground streams where gravity will pull it to even lower levels. The soil may clean some of it, but in many parts of Virginia, some of that soapy water will eventually wash into the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Six states linked together. The Chesapeake Bay watershed covers parts of 6 states and Washington, D.C. Over 16 million people share the watershed. So if someone in Pennsylvania dumps toxic chemicals into a river or stream, it can affect millions of people living hundreds of miles away. And that's kind of what we were talking about with your assignment. So if you're in Maryland, how's it going to affect people in the coastal plain? Think about the fertilizers from a farm in New York. Think about that, I'm sorry. Fertilizers from a farm in New York can end up in the Chesapeake Bay. A pesticide, that's what you're thinking about for when you're doing your writing. A pesticide sprayed on a field of lettuce in Maryland could end up flowing into our waters. Where do we live? The coastal plain. So this should help you in writing your letter. Everything we do, washing our dogs, watering our lawns, flushing our toilets, driving our cars, and even turning on the lights has an impact on the creeks, streams, and rivers that lead to the bay. Okay, I'm going to go up where it says speak like a scientist. I'm sorry, over here, speak like a scientist. They tell you what is a watershed. It's an area of land where all the water above and below ground flows to the same place. And you can see this picture right here. Next to it, it says, should car washes be banned? No, just choose soaps without phosphates. If you can, park cars on grass and wash them there. Soil helps us to filter wastewater. And when I come down here to this text box, it says the biggest estuary in America. An estuary is a place where salt water from the ocean mixes with fresh water from rivers and streams. The Chesapeake watershed is the largest estuary in the United States. Estuaries are important to the ecosystem because they're blackish waters, another name for a mix of salt and fresh water, provide habitats for a wide range of plants and animal species, such as shrimp, oysters, and crabs. Okay. Finally, now I'm up here where it says speak like a scientist, and this is tributaries. They are streams that feed larger streams, lakes, or rivers. And then you'll notice there's a picture of Virginia here. Let me see if I can get this a little bit bigger for you. I know you have it in front of you, but. Okay, so I'm looking, whoops. Right. So here's Virginia. It says the blue lines show Virginia's major rivers and streams. There are about 150 along with thousands of other small creeks that crisscross the state. Find the rivers nearest the place you live. Now you know we're here in the coastal plain. So we know that we have the eastern shore over here, and we know that the rivers flow into the Chesapeake Bay. And what we're reading about now is the Chesapeake watershed. However, we did read that it covers parts of 6 states, not just Virginia. So here it talks about we all live downstream. And it says, even if you live in the Blue Ridge Mountains or in an apartment building in a big city, you still live in a watershed. The Chesapeake Bay watershed covers about half of Virginia. The rest of our state's water flow into 2 other major drainage areas. If you live in Southwest Virginia, then your water will still flow into the Gulf of Mexico through the Mississippi River. If you live in Virginia's southern edge, your water flows into the North Carolina Outer Banks. But no matter where you live, everything you do affects a watershed, which is why when we're talking about the farmers living in Maryland, it's going to affect the people who live downstream in the coastal plain. Why? That's what you're going to be explaining. Okay. Caring for the watershed. Because the Chesapeake watershed is so big, it is of enormous importance to the health of our state and nation. Learn as much as you can about the bay, find out what animals live there and how they survive. Adopt a species such as the blue crab or osprey and learn all you can about it. And the next time you give your dog a soapy bath outside, learn how to do it in a bay-friendly way. The health of the watershed is the job of everyone, so we all play a part. And then this is a sky view, kind of looks like what you'd see from the Google Earth. This satellite view of the Chesapeake watershed reveals a lot. It says some environmentalists believe the brownish filled waters shown to the left of the yellow arrow, so all the brownish filled waters, were caused by industrial drilling in other states. Okay, so that's the Chesapeake watershed. You are going to do what it says for your assignment. which is here. So you're after listening to this, you're going to want to write a letter to your teacher explaining how a farmer using pesticides in Maryland might impact people living in the coastal plain of Virginia. Go back into what we just read and find information that you can give to your teacher when you're writing your letter. Okay. Lastly, I wanted to show you on your assignment, it says it is optional, but just in case you're interested, if you'd like to learn more about watersheds, you can visit Interactive Watersheds site that's by the Project Wet Foundation. I wanted to just click on that quickly so you could see what that looks like. So when you go to it, it's all interactive. So you can click on things, you can play the video, you can go over here to these activities. It's showing you what a watershed looks like, and it's allowing you to be able to explore it. Okay. All right, well, that's all I have for you today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will be back tomorrow with day 3 of your packet. Take care.